I do tend to ramble about the Gaunt's Ghost book series and the models that I'm making about the series quite a lot. I have over 50 videos about them on the channel already, but some crazy people seem to like my insights, and I've been asked several times for some variation of a lore breakdown of some of the book series. I've always said there are three sides to the wargaming hobby. There are the games themselves, obviously, the crafting side with painting and model making, and the stories behind that, either real history or fictional lore. And the lore side of things is something that I haven't really looked at for the channel until now, and as a few people have asked, I thought, well, I'd give it a go, but I wasn't really sure what topic should I cover, how do I make a video out of it? Until I realised that I do actually have one weird opinion about the Gaunt's Ghost books that I can talk about. And so, hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and today I'll make the case for why you should start reading the Gaunt's Ghost series with the second book, Ghostmaker, instead of starting with the first. The Gaunt's Ghost series is one of the most popular Black Library productions written by the prolific science fiction author Dan Abnett, who has written for Doctor Who and Torchwood, Judge Dredd, Marvel and DC comic stories, and heaps of others. So with such a talent behind the Gaunt's Ghost novels, it is no surprise that they find popularity within Warhammer fans as well. The Gaunt's Ghost series is characterised by great characters, cool battle sequences that serve the story rather than the other way round, and story arcs that are more than just excuses for Space Marines to call each other brother for 700 pages in a row. The main series to date is 15 novels, and there's an endless list of short stories and comics as well that even I've not been able to track everything down. I have, as you might guess, read a lot of this series, but with it being so expansive, it is intimidating for someone to get started in. Who wants to get into a book series that long, right? Well, a lot of people who like long book series, obviously. The usual idea for starting a book series, particularly one that's so big, is to start at the beginning. But for the Gaunt's Ghost books, I think there's another option. The second book, Ghostmaker, serves as a great introduction to quite a few of the characters who appear throughout the rest of the series. The popular theory is that Ghostmaker was created by Dan Abnett tying several of his short stories together for a single release. In a TV series, that would be called a clip episode and would probably suck. In a book, it means that you don't have to track down this one specific issue of this magazine and also these 10 other instances of specific magazines and comics and books to collect the whole set. The other theory is that it was just written as a normal novel, but just in a style that focuses on each of the characters in turn. Regardless of how the book actually came to be, the form it takes is of an overarching story on Monthax, one of the planets taken in the early stages of the Sabbac World's Crusade, which is of course a story all of itself. Within this setting on Monthax, the titular Colonel Commissar Ibrahim Gaunt checks up on his soldiers, walks the line, inspects the defences and so on, as a good commander should. And this is one of the aspects of Gaunt's character that is so important. He is a good commander, popular with his ghosts, his soldiers. It's quite the contrast from the average Warhammer commander who would send 3,500 men to die in an afternoon and then call for another regiment to reinforce. On his little stroll, Gaunt speaks to each of the characters in turn, has a quick word about nothing really important with each of them, and then the story jumps to a previous encounter that same character was pivotal in. From the time that Mkoll went toe-to-toe with the Chaos Dreadnought, that fun escapade where Bragg was put in charge of a convoy escort, and proof that Milo is not a psyker, honest inquisitor. Each of these stories are small snippets of a much larger setting, and that feeling is the virtue that I will extol as the reason for me suggesting this is the place to start. Because you don't need to know the characters in advance, you don't need to know about the Crusade, or the Imperium, or the Imperial Guard, and in many ways you don't really need to know much about 40k either. And so I will, over the course of this video, go into altogether far too much detail about each of these story segments, talk about the characters and their little exciting adventures. I hope this gives you some insight into a book that I really love, from a series that I really love, and maybe you just give it a read or listen to the audio version. There will naturally be some minor spoilers throughout this video, but towards the end I will give a warning before I reveal the ending of the book. But for the moment, shall we start off at the beginning? Gaunt, on the founding fields of Tanith and the First Blood on Blackshard. The book begins with a quick note from a historian looking back on the events of the Crusade, an idea that keeps popping up throughout the series and one that I'm quite taken by. The note suggests that the battles on Monthax are somewhat confusing, or that the information is missing in that later time, but it's really just foreshadowing the ending of the book, of course. The next page starts describing Monthax, and the reader might just get a feel of seeing into history in this fictional setting. There was a smell in the air, a smell like rank sweat. The smell didn't surprise Colonel Commissar Abraham Gaunt. What did surprise him is that it wasn't coming from his men. The first glimpse of Monthax are as a swampy, boggy and very wet place. The focus of these couple of pages puts me in the thoughts of anyone in that situation. It's wet, your feet disappear into the sludge, it's hot, and there's insects everywhere. Gaunt steps out from a command shed and sees fighting off in the distance, the sound of artillery, but his men are far from it. He thinks about this lack of activity and how it lets the mind wander, and he dwells on old stories, on beginnings. And we get our first short story. A flashback of the founding fields of the Tanith First and Only, or rather, the Tanith First, Second and Third. The three regiments are all tented up on the founding fields, a term that every Ghost fan knows all too well. We get a quick glimpse of Larkin, Bragg, Corbec and Rawne chatting about their new commander coming in. And we also get some interactions between Gaunt and Sim, a character who doesn't last very long, but also Bryn Milo, a boy of about 17 who is a piper for the Tanith dignitaries. It is made clear throughout these sequences that Gaunt is not also impressed by the Tanith soldiers, and holds opinions that other Imperial commanders would also come to throughout the Tanith service. They're scruffy and have tattoos and piercings in a sing-song accent that just doesn't make them seem so tough. Then comes the bad news. A Chaos splinter fleet from the Imperial victory at Balhut has emerged and is attacking Tanith. This event is fundamentally the entire reason for the existence of Gaunt's ghosts. This disaster at the founding spawned every story that comes after. But this is only a few pages, just a short, to cover the event. Honestly, I don't know how it could be expanded upon without Abnett completely rewriting the whole thing, but it seems like such a small look into such an important event. The big decision was made by Gaunt himself, with 3 regiments who had never seen combat, and half of whom in transport up to the troop ships in orbit. Defending the planet was not really an option. A brave, glorious last stand would in reality just be a worthless slaughter. Instead, he ordered a withdrawal, take every Tanith soldier he could off-world to fight somewhere else. A decision which has obviously not very popular with the Tanith soldiers. What we then get is a pivotal conversation that happens on the troop ships a day later as the ships depart. 15 men of the Tanith come to pay Gaunt a little visit. It's strongly implied that a quiet assassination is on the cards, but Gaunt manages to talk them up. Instead of trying to talk them down, he plainly details his decision and the reasoning behind why he chose to withdraw, and then immediately promotes 2 of them to command the regiment. Troopers Corbec and Rawne become colonel and major, respectively. One part of his persuasive argument is that upon joining the Guard, a soldier of the Imperium will likely never return home, so having no home to return to doesn't really change much, but more importantly, Warmaster Slado granted Gaunt settlement rights, which he can extend to the men of Tanith. So whenever Tanith win a world, they get to settle and colonise that world, creating a new Tanith of sorts. Gaunt also asks Bryn Milo to become his adjunct, replacing Sim, who was possibly the earliest named character death in the story of the Ghosts. That title might go to Major Garth of the Tanith, who I assume died on world with the rest of the trained officers of the Tanith founding. We then skip ahead to Blackshard, likely only a few weeks or months later, and the remnants of the Tanith have been reorganised into a single regiment, the Tanith First. The Tanith First and Only. This is the first real engagement for the Tanith as they prove their worth as fighters and scouts. The prose makes particular note that Gaunt is impressed. Scuttling their way through a wooded area and then through tunnels under an enemy-held settlement, the Ghosts fight their way through to an important chaos temple or something. The exact details aren't important beyond, it's chaos, let's blow it up. We also get the first named Tanith to die in whatever the book equivalent of on-screen is, Forgel. Gaunt orders all of the Ghosts to leave their tube charges behind and pull back from the area so they can blow the building. And Rawne sees an opportunity. As Gaunt turned, Rawne rose and clubbed him around the back of the head with his fist. Gaunt dropped, stunned, and Rawne rolled him over next to the tube charges. A fitting place for scum like you to die, Ghostmaker. Roll credits. Then, one of the strangest parts of this story, Gaunt overpowers Rawne and then carries him out of the area. You might think that a commissar of the 40k universe would punish the attempted murder of a superior officer, Gaunt himself, but in this case Gaunt chooses to not just spare, but to actively save Rawne. This decision is one of several over the course of this double-dose short story that gives you the idea that Gaunt isn't a simple guard officer, but rather has a lot more thought about how to lead soldiers. His ability to see a larger situation and the details within, and make decisions without hesitation comes back several times, particularly in the next book, Necropolis. And his leadership style, not simply meting out punishment like a meme-standard commissar, but to inspire confidence, comes back consistently throughout the series, including Jago in the book Only in Death. We don't really see a lot of any other character just yet. There's a few lines for Corbec and of course Rawne's betrayal, but it's gone through at breakneck speed and the setting is the important aspect of this short, the founding and the regiment coming together. As a long-time fan of the series, I of course want more of this transformative and defining time, to see the regiment's grief and their coming together. But for a new reader, it lays out the important series of events without bloating into 1,000 subplots. And that emphasis is the point of this video. Gaunt on Voltemand. After the first story, we snap back to the present day for one page. Gaunt still walking the defences on Monthax and still reminiscing. If we follow that these first stories are Gaunt's memories, or perhaps all of the stories in the book are, then it shows that the fall of Tanith doesn't sit right with him. He certainly stands by his decision, but it is not the outcome he would have liked. Gaunt continues his reminiscing with the fighting on Voltemand, and one of the biggest losses the regiment suffered in those early years. Starting with a pretty amazing and unbelievable sequence where a group of Tanith ambush an ambush of World Eaters without much effort, saving Quetzalcoatl artillery, who will become very relevant in the rest of this short. The Tanith hitch a ride on the basilisks and support vehicles that survived the ambush, and we get some fun interaction with Corbec swapping for some cigars that taste of licorice, Bragg losing all of his consumables gambling, and Rawne swearing revenge on Gaunt. In other scenes we see Gilbert and Sturm, officers of the Volpone, or Volpone, or Volpone, however that little argument is getting on. They do a little exposition to the audience about how Gaunt is perceived by these stuck-up commanders, and interestingly, they have the same opinion of the Tanith as Gaunt did when he first saw them. The first such sequence ends with Sturm going all sinister, saying, "They will not achieve anything else. We will serve Lord Makaroth twofold by taking this little world and ridding him of Gaunt and his damn ghosts." Interestingly, on the opposite page, on a line that nearly touches ink with the above quote, is Gaunt's foreshadowing of the rest of the short by telling the Quetzalcoatl commander, "Don't drop your damn aim, remember you have friends in that valley." After some prep with the Quetzalcoatl, the Tanith move up to Voltis, the old capital of Voltemand, and begin infiltrating the water system, intending to get up the wall so they can blow it open for the Volpone to attack the city en masse. Problem is, once the Tanith have made some headway, fighting back the Chaos cultists defending the waterways, the Chaos open the sluice gates, flushing out the Tanith and making entry through the system impossible. Even as they are regrouping, someone gives the call over the radio of a successful mission, and seconds later the walls blow open. It turns out one of the Tanith units went up a sewage line that didn't have a sluice gate, or if it did, it was broken, or possibly the Chaos just didn't open it in time. With success in hand, the Tanith withdraw, allowing the Volpone to take the city, but as breakfast is served to General Sturm, he asks where the ghosts are. Gilbert eyed his slate. "Seems they pulled out along the eastern side of the Beaucourt Valley." Sturm set down his silver cutlery and started to type on his memo slate. "Send these orders under extreme encryption to the CO of the Quetzalcoatl Basilisks." Gilbert looked at the slate. "I say. There are dangerous cultists fleeing along the eastern side of the valley. Why, you've just read me the intelligence reports." And this is the start of a bitter rivalry between the Volpone and the Tanith, an in-the-field murder of 300 and another 200 wounded. This low figure might be a testament to the skills of the Tanith in swift movement away from the target zone, or just the inefficiency of Imperial artillery. Either way, Gaunt is not impressed and lamps the Quetzalcoatl commander, ending himself on charges of striking a fellow officer, which Sturm gleefully takes as an opportunity to have Gaunt executed. In his defense, Gaunt states one of my favourite quotes of the entire book series. "They call the phenomena friendly fire, but I can tell you, when you're in the target zone with nothing but twigs and dust for cover, it's nothing like friendly." During this very conversation, Colonel Ortiz, the Quetzalcoatl commander, rams his basilisk through the gates of the fancy mansion that Sturm has taken as his very comfortable command HQ, and delivers an incident report that states he was injured by the recoil of one of his artillery pieces and not, in fact, Gaunt's fist. I find it a shame that we don't see much more of Ortiz. He's a good little character with barely any lines, and good officers are hard to come by in the Gaunt's Ghost series. Particularly General Sturm and Major Gilbert, who unfortunately do pop up again, prove to not only be dastardly officers, but hell-bent on actually killing off the ghosts in future encounters. This recurring theme is one of many connections to the inspiration from Sharp's rifles. Sharp is a fictional commander promoted through the ranks, where Gaunt has been trained through the Scholar Progenium to be a commissar and cross-promoted into command. If you like one, you'll probably like the other. They have similar humour and action, but they're certainly not carbon copies of each other, sort of like the similarities between Dune and 40k. Mkoll on Ramillies. After all that excitement, we finally get to a sequence about a character other than Gaunt. Although first snapping back to the present on Monthax, and Gaunt receives a patrol report from Scout Sergeant Mkoll. Mkoll's report is simply that there isn't much enemy presence nearby, and what they did come across was easily dealt with. Gaunt insists on specifics, not to undermine Mkoll's modesty, but to have the best idea as to what the enemy might be up to. Mkoll also reports that he saw a structure, and this will come back later in the book, but first a flashback short story about another patrol that Mkoll was very modest about. The glorious Adeptus Astartes had broken the Chaos fortifications on Ramillies 268-43 and destroyed most of the forces. However, some small elements had retreated into the hills. The cleanup operation is beneath the glorious Beakies, and so that task fell upon the Tanith First and Only, with Mkoll organising the scouts into patrol paths to find any signs of the enemy. After days of scant fighting, and then further days of no contact at all, Mkoll felt that some of the scouts were becoming complacent, and we get a little sequence of Mkoll showing up Scout Dewa. They come across another scout who's been killed by one of the standard alien plants of the 40k universe, a plant that listens for any creature moving around, and when it detects a sound loud enough, it spits a barb that's sometimes up to 30 centimeters in their direction. These plants can be found in clusters, covering an area so that once an animal is hit by one, their cries of pain set off other ones, hitting the creature from multiple angles. Which is what has happened to another scout in the team. I'd love to go off on a little tangent to discuss this little xeno plant further, but this basic understanding is enough to follow the rest of the short. Dewa unfortunately gets hit when the dead scout's radio crackles, but manages to keep quiet, a testament to his resolve to be sure. It becomes quickly apparent to Mkoll that the barbs of these plants are venomed, so even after applying a field dressing, Dewa is in some trouble. Tying another dressing into the scout's mouth to keep him quiet, the next sequence is one of the fights that Imperial historians would never believe and always chalk up to bravado and exaggeration. Into the clearing walks a Chaos Dreadnought. Several tons of high-tech, armoured, walking tank. Its heavy footfalls set off all of the plant barbs, but nothing gets through its armour. Dewa sees it and screams in his venom-infused stupor. A combination of a salvo of plant barbs and dreadnought plasma ends Dewa before his lungs are empty. Just like the plants, the dreadnought is hunting by sound alone. Its visor has been destroyed, probably during the fighting some weeks before. So Mkoll has only one option: to stay quiet, or maybe to take advantage of sound. Quick thinking on Mkoll's part leads him to throw a frag grenade away from himself and the dreadnought. The sound of the detonation sets off all of the barbs pointing towards it, making a temporary safe spot for Mkoll to move into. This also attracts the dreadnought, and Mkoll sets his lasgun to overcharge the power cell. The dreadnought finds the lasgun, picks it up in its claw, as if to smell it, as the power cell detonates, blowing the damaged visor panel open and the sound setting off more barbs. With now a gaping hole in the armour, some of those barbs find their way into the squishy pilot inside, and the poison does its work. The fourth and final member of the scout team arrives and is rightfully astonished, but Mkoll tells him to keep the whole "you just killed a dreadnought by yourself" thing quiet, and to just say that the sector is clear. Mkoll's modesty truly knows no bounds. This short is altogether far too short for this epic encounter. The fight takes all of a few seconds, sure, and the lead up is tightly written. I can't fault it in the slightest, and for a new reader this is just perfect to show off how Mkoll can keep his head cool in any situation and can stay perfectly quiet when he needs to be. Corbec on Calligula. The next short, after the half page on Monthax with Corbec, details the landing on Calligula and how Colonel Corbec excels himself in command. Starting in some landing craft, we get a Chaos Storm thrown up, a fantastic defensive tactic that destroys many of the landing craft and cuts off Imperial attack craft support as well as further reinforcements. Gaunt's lander gets separated from the rest of the army, much like a classic Star Trek episode with two stories that barely have anything to do with each other but complement each other in a literary sense. Gaunt's half of the story does have some interest, with Bragg, Milo, Rawne and some others featuring a few lines. They get separated and they end up finding the locals' weed plantation. But the real half of this is with Corbec, who lands well enough with the rest of the regiment. Corbec immediately steps up to take command of the soldiers. Whilst we would expect Gaunt to grab a Vox and organise things on a larger scale, Corbec gets stuck in by himself as an instinctive reaction. But not only does he grab the closest squads and organise things into an assault, but he spares a few moments to make a jovial bet and some other morale-boosting casual comments. Which seems to be the best character trait of Corbec. He takes things seriously, but he abjectly refuses to take things seriously. He'll charge forward into gunfire, which he did on the Voltemand water system assault, and halfway through he'll make some sarcastic comment or a bet or something else that is just so funny and irreverent of the seriousness of the situation. But also outside of combat, he makes a point to befriend the commanders of other units, like Colonel Ortiz of the Quetzalcoatl, and importantly to this short, Executive Officer Kref from the Navarre. Corbec and his squad, which specifically mentions Trooper Soth, who's armed with a melter, so stick that to anyone who says the ghosts don't use melters. Corbec and his squad come across something horrifying in the bulbous, milky blue tentacled monster with 1,000 eyes. A chaos demon. Not just any demon, but the one conjuring the storm. After Larkin blasts away an entire power cell with Corbec desperately trying to not get hit, Corbec pulls back his whole squad and gets Kref on the Vox. Without any attack craft support, the only alternative is to use the Navarre's main battery, an exceptionally danger-close shot, but one well within the capabilities of a weapon system designed to hit enemy ships at tens of thousands of kilometers. After a perfect display of accuracy, the demon vaporized by the ship's weapons, the storm dissipates, allowing for the invasion to continue. Corbec then sends an unofficial communique to the Navarre. Message reads, "Ghostly gratitude to the Navarre. Kref, you bastard, we know you had it in you." I have been known to say that Corbec resonates the least for me and is the most forgettable, but his humour and sarcasm is spot on, and he is rightfully a favourite character of many. Larkin on Bucephalon. Rolling back to Monthax, and Gaunt passes by Mad Larkin, narrating to the audience that the crazy old man might not make it much longer. Larkin's section is probably the best in the book, at least in my opinion. The writing and flow is just perfect, and so much so that I don't think I can do it justice here, so I'll just briefly describe the scene. It takes place during an assault on Bucephalon, where the charismatic Chaos Commander, Nocad, has converted the populace to chaos. Larkin had been part of a strike force to assassinate Nocad, but due to his mental health issues, which the Imperium does not treat very well, he has broken and fled, ending up in an Imperial chapel. Over the course of a few pages, Larkin has a conversation with the statue of an angel, who talks to him through his psychotic episode, at least the early stages of it, and sets him up to take the shot just as Nocad comes into view from the chapel's window. There are massive implications to this story depending on how you wish to read it. Is it a hallucination? A real angel? Is it a lie that Larkin told Gaunt after the fact? In the fiction of the 40k universe, angels, demon and magic are all real, so it's very well possible that it is a real interaction. "Who am I to say?" Larkin said. "I'm mad. Visions and phantoms appear to me on a daily basis. I'm not in a position to say what's real and what is not." The result of this conversation is Larkin setting up for the shot, going through all of the motions of a proper long-range shot, and for anyone with any knowledge of shooting, it's all correct, it's pretty basic stuff. I've seen talk that this shot is at a range of 3 or 4 kilometers, although there's nothing directly in the short about that, so if anyone does have any information, I'd like to hear where that comes from. One of the reasons why this is such an effective sequence, and one of my favourites in the book as I mentioned, is that it's all pretty much just a single conversation. There's no combat, there's no action, it's just a quiet conversation between Larkin and the vision of a statue. But it holds more power and more weight than any simple fight sequence does, and the way that it's written is the book equivalent of a one-shot in film talk, and it works really well. Bragg on Calligula. The next story in the book is Larkin's best friend, Bragg. Big, friendly, try-again Bragg. The Monthax section is a little bit longer than the previous ones, but still pretty short, with Gaunt having a quick chat with the heavy weapons trooper, watching him fix a drink with deliberate, gentle motions, even though he is the biggest of the Tanith. Bragg's short takes place on Calligula, the same planet as Corbec's before, but this time after the Liberation. I'm not certain if the short stories in this book are in chronological order, as I doubt they would go back to a planet after having been shipped to a different one, but that's not really all that important. Bragg has been put in charge of a convoy run through an area where remnants of the cultists are waging a guerrilla war, taking out convoys like this one to strangle the Imperial rebuilding effort. There's two ways to read this story. One, the obvious, is that Bragg is a little thin in the intelligence department, which is how a new reader will read it, and that's what the drivers of the convoy think as well. Upon a second reading, you realise that Bragg is playing the part, and having a whale of a time doing it. Almost to the point where he's making fun of the drivers for not realising how much he's playing up being less intelligent. Putting Bragg in charge, a simple trooper, not an officer, of the convoy made it seem like Gaunt had written off the whole convoy as lost. And these two factors together brought the cultists out in force, and Bragg responded in force, with the full force of the Imperial Navy, who strafed their ambush and pretty much put an end to the guerrilla war. The fight sequence here is pretty amazing. Abnett's writing style of battles is intense and detailed, but as I mentioned in the intro, it serves the story and not the other way around. And it's one of the few times that the Tanith are seen in control of vehicles, bikes and half-tracks. It's not expressly stated if these are part of the convoy that the Tanith temporarily used, or if they stay with the Tanith. There are a couple of other books where the Tanith have motorbikes and other vehicles, but that's not important, that's me just going off on a tangent again. The sequence ends with a beautiful reveal as Bragg details just exactly what's going on and how the traitorous vehicle crew have basically ratted themselves out. It is a brilliant piece of misdirection, both in the story and to the reader. And this one in particular deserves a second read once you understand that Bragg is playing that part. Rawne on Typhon 8. To stop myself getting sidetracked by the bikes, let's jump into the next section of the book. Again, we get a quick page and a half on Monthax. Gaunt walks past Major Rawne, who is shaving. A knife against a knife, indeed. Gaunt narrates that he would have to watch his back for Rawne, as his bitterness for their lost world is solely focused on Gaunt. Rawne's short story takes place on Typhon 8, and the only time in the series where the enemies of the ghosts are the orcs. They're in a frozen wasteland and the orcs are racing around in their crude vehicles, pretty much makes it Mad Max on ice. Culminating in an action chase sequence, we get a lot of interaction between Gaunt and Rawne, and there is no love lost. With several opportunities for Rawne to end Gaunt, or just to allow Gaunt to die from the dangerous environment or from the orcs, the pair are forced to work together to keep each other alive. The relationship between these two is complex and fraught with hatred, mostly on Rawne's side, as he focuses all of the anguish from losing his homeworld onto Gaunt, who he sees as leaving it to die by ordering them off Tanith when it was attacked. Rawne constantly and obviously threatens to kill Gaunt, but the only time we see him try is the earlier incident on Blackshard, where Gaunt survives and drags Rawne out to safety. The ending of this short is Rawne not only not letting Gaunt die, but actively saving him in return, with an "I owed you and I don't want to owe you" kind of honour excuse. But maybe it shows that Rawne does respect Gaunt's leadership. Doesn't like him, for sure, but respects him as an officer. Dorden on Nacedon. Gaunt's walkabout on Monthax takes him to the medical sheds, which are surprisingly well set up with aircon and everything. Here we find the Tanith's chief medical officer, Dorden, cleaning and re-cleaning everything. Dorden is a kindly and very stubborn old man, 20 years the senior of anyone else in the regiment. Gaunt mentions that if his idle cleaning is all he does, then it's better for everyone, but Dorden comments that, while true, the idleness doesn't sit right with him either. His short story is set during the Nacedon campaign, a world that the Chaos have invaded very recently, staking claim to the planet so that they can slow the progress of the Sabbat World's crusade. After the Imperial forces arrive, the battle lines ebb and flow, and at one point the Voltemand Blue Bloods, yes, those same Voltemand Blue Bloods of the previous shorts, have withdrawn, leaving a farmhouse full of their heavily wounded. When the Tanith move through the area, also withdrawing, Dorden stubbornly refuses to leave the Voltland to die. By himself or with volunteers, he will stay behind to treat the wounded Voltland and keep them alive overnight for when the Imperial counteroffensive should retake the area. Corbec tries to talk him out of it, as does Gaunt, but Gaunt does relent and leave behind 10 volunteers. Turns out everyone volunteered. Everyone? Not Major Rawne, I'd bet. Mkoll grinned ruefully. Alright, not everyone. One of the volunteers permitted to remain is Colonel Corbec, who takes the situation in his usual style of taking it seriously, but refusing to take it seriously. He organises the defence, sends Mkoll out scouting, whilst Dorden and several orderlies, including Lesp, see to the wounded to keep them going. They work through the evening and into the night, stabilising many. Unfortunately, some are just too injured to survive. By dawn, the Chaos Advance have scouted the farmhouse and launch an attack. At first, simply a mass infantry charge, which is blunted by Corbec's squad, well dug into the defences that were seemingly set up by the Voltland who abandoned the house. We get a few interactions with Kulkis, a blue blood who is able enough to shoot from a rested position in the defences, and there are a few other Voltland who are wounded in some way that doesn't affect their ability to shoot through a bolt hole. During this assault, Dorden has a crash with reality. Due to his stubbornness, not only will all the Voltland die anyway, overrun by the Chaos Assault, but another 10 Tanith will perish as well. Of note here, it's stated that the number of Tanith is less than 2,000. There were 6,000 at the original founding, only 3,500 made it off Tanith, and now, not long after, that's down to less than 2,000. The Chaos forces do eventually pull back, not able to dislodge the defenders with a head-on assault. They clear the area instead for an artillery barrage, and Corbec talks to comfort Dorden. Not by saying that this was a good plan or that it was worth doing, but by talking about home. It's a surprisingly touching scene for Corbec, and we get a strong insight into Dorden's past as well. As the artillery begins to fire, the Imperial artillery targeting the Chaos, and the counterpush takes back the farmhouse into Imperial hands. This is a great character sequence for Dorden, really showing while he is stubborn and moral, he isn't always arrogantly sure of himself. And his conversation with Corbec is just really touching. Caffran on Sapiencia. Back on Monthax, Gaunt passes by Caffran, drilling with a bayonet against a tree. Shadowing the sentiments from Dorden about being idle for so long before a fight, and then in the fight wishing that you are idle again. Gaunt gives him a quick suggestion on his technique and thinks about how capable Caffran is in the heat of battle. Caffran's short is set on Sapiencia and an aerial to beach landing to take an island with a fuel refinery. With visions of Omaha Beach in any number of World War II films that have depicted it, the landing is pretty handily botched, with the aerial landing craft dropping infantry and tanks into the water. Fighting up the beaches, we get a lot of internal thoughts from Caffran, especially his thoughts on Gaunt and memories of lost Tanith. With no way forward and no way back, the Tanith are stuck on the beach until another lander is shot down and crashes into the defensive sea wall ahead of them, blowing a huge chunk out of it that they try to advance into. Defensive fire is still too strong for them to advance into the breach, and at about this time a Quetzalcoatl corporal comes up to warn them that they will bombard the gap to widen it and the Tanith should withdraw. "Wish he'd given us the same warning on Voltemand," Domor said icily. But Domor also spots a smaller opening, a transit tunnel of sorts inside the broken section of wall, and before the Quetzalcoatl can open fire, the Tanith get a small team inside, losing Sergeant Gawley to the first of the Quetzalcoatl shells. Making their way further inside the structure, Caffran finds himself in charge, the other troopers deferring to him. They engage in firefights, hit and runs, breaches, demolitions. Over the course of probably only an hour or so, they make it seem like so many separate small attacks that the Chaos think that there is a mass incursion of many small Imperial units and not just the one. This spurs the twisted Chaos commander to slaughter his own soldiers, all of them, the service of death to their Dark Lords and all of that. What this means is that the Imperial Guard of the Volpone regiments take the refinery with very little resistance, and the day is won. Over the course of the short story, we get a lot of action for Domor as well, who appeared in the first book getting wounded in the eyes, and here he has vision augments that get damaged by the seawater. Caffran's attacks here are all based on snap decisions, remembering the briefing, and guesses, and just getting stuck in. Gaunt tells him that he shouldn't tell Corbec any of that, or he'll get ideas. This is a fun little story, with a character getting stuck in well over his head to be sure, but not letting that stop him, and ultimately winning the day. Milo in the Navarra en route to Monthax. The last of the character-focused shorts is Bryn Milo, the boy that Gaunt rescued at the beginning of the book during the founding. We get some small insight that we're hitting close to the last sequences of the book, as Milo brings Gaunt very specifically some information about Monthax, and Gaunt makes mention to an event that takes place last week. So our short story memories are approaching the present of the book, even if they're not all in perfect chronological order. Gaunt also specifically tells Milo to stop being so good at predicting things, as people can easily get the wrong idea, especially in the 40k universe. Milo also lets out that he's 18 now, and Gaunt gives him a privet rank on the spot. But to go into the short itself, rolling back all of a week to the Navarra, an Imperial naval ship that the Ghosts have been transported on several times in a row from world to world. The Ghosts are aboard alongside the Volpone, a recipe for some issues to be sure given the history of the two regiments. That said, Dorden's story previously has done some work to reconcile at least a little bit, and Milo, along with Val, Bragg and some others, are up to no good. They're having a friendly, playful scam. They have found some insects in the stores, and a sensor ball. Having numbered each of the holes, they put the insect inside and take bets on which hole it will emerge from. Unfortunately, one of the Volpone listening is none other than Major Gilbert, the same as carried the orders on Voltemand. Gilbert kicks up a stir, but the scam goes ahead anyway, and the Tanith take their unfair share of winnings. The scene changes to a command briefing, with various commanders preparing for the assault on Monthax, including Gaunt and Sturm. Yes, that Sturm. Major Gilbert turns up and has a suspicious conversation with Sturm, while Gaunt has his own suspicious chat with a commissar from the Rawne Deepers, Volvoli. The Volpone conversation, however, has serious implications, as we quickly find out. Inquisitor Lilith turns up and questions Gaunt about Milo, and then questions Milo himself. The Voltemand have reported to the Inquisition that Milo is a psyker, an accusation that must be investigated, even though Lilith is fully aware of the rivalry between the two regiments. Milo's guesses, his suppositions, his ability to have things ready in advance of when they're actually needed are all suspicious when people are superstitious, and even more so when you have a rival who wants you dead by any means. The interrogation is altogether quite short, as Milo answers honestly and candidly. However, Inquisitor Lilith quickly gets to the truth of the matter. Milo has some sugar loose in his pocket, and when he reaches for the coins to place a bet, and then to touch the sensor ball, he rubs some on the hole he wants the insect to come out of. Lilith is not so impressed, but closes the investigation, and we move on to the finale of the book. This is one of the little scenes that show Dan Abnett's style is much less extreme than the usual 40k memes. Rather than a witch hunt, a kangaroo caught and a burning, the Inquisitor does an actual investigation to find the truth of the matter. Which is another of my favourite parts about the Gaunt's Ghost novels, as opposed to other 40k stuff, is that the rest of 40k is all about the extremes, whereas Gaunt's Ghosts is much more reasonable and believable. The finale, on Monthax. As I said at the beginning, I'll put a spoiler warning in here, as I'll be discussing the ending. And if I've piqued your interest, stop here and go and read the book. And if you remember after that, come back to finish off my video. But also pop past the comments section to thank the people who tricked me into making this video. So, this last section of the book, which is as long as 2 or 3 of the short stories so far, ties together a lot of the little snippets of Monthax that we've seen already. But it also lets each of the ghosts who have featured so far play their roles together rather than singly. It begins cutting back to the Chaos Offensive in the distance, moving with a purpose, but not towards any Imperial unit. Mkoll supposes they're after the structure that he saw, except Mkoll hasn't been able to find it since. With all his tracking and scouting abilities, the best of the Tanith by far, he couldn't find it on further patrols. We also get snippets of Milo and Caffran making friends. Now that Milo has a field rank, Caffran isn't so cold to what had been the only civilian rescued from Lost Tanith. As Mkoll disappears out to scout, leaving Domor in charge of the squad, Corbec sorely misses Larkin, grumbling and fear-mongering, because the sniper got assigned to Rawne's squad temporarily. The strange thing throughout these pages is the other sections, the alternate sections, where a character only called Old One at first is up to, well, who knows? Clearly some psyker thing, but are they chaos or an Imperial entity? There's also something else that starts seeding throughout this section of the book. Caffran feels at home now that Milo is trooper, like having a little brother home on Tanith. Not from home, on home. Lerod gets stuck between the fire of 2 heavy stubbers, which both miss to either side of him, and he feels jubilant, like on the founding fields of Tanith. And Milo smells the trees, saying that they smell exactly like Nullwood, the trees that famously only grow on Tanith. In one sequence, Gaunt sees Corbec running through the trees covered in fragments of foliage, and thinks he looks just like the old man of the woods home on Tanith. Except Gaunt's home isn't Tanith. The Old One, the psyker at play in this situation, stirs up their energies and creates a storm, hurting themselves in doing so, tearing not only their own minds but the entire region with wind, hail and lightning. One of Rawne's mob gets stabbed in the throat by a leaf carried by a near horizontal wind, and Rawne himself is pretty surprised as the founding was going so well and he'd never seen a storm like this on Tanith before. Inquisitor Lilith is also on world, caught up in the storm with an honour guard of 30 Volpone Blueblood Scions, and she knows full well that the storm is warp wrought. Except it doesn't have the filth of chaos. And about this point the reader gets a real treat in the middle of this section. A 4-page epic action sequence of Mkoll fighting for his life, sliding down wet muddy hills, identifying targets by lightning strikes or muzzle flashes, grappling and shooting any enemy he could with any weapon he can keep his hands on. The thunder, the crack of shots, the clamouring of voices like a baying pack of hounds. It is a roaring good sequence and a favourite of many for good reason. Elsewhere, Corbec is somehow ambushed by some blue bloods who wear bright blue and gold armour, nearly ending in them shooting each other, even with Gaunt's intervention. Thankfully, Inquisitor Lilith is more successful and everyone does stand down, but she takes Gaunt aside and talks about Milo again. It becomes clear to the reader at this point that the old one, that Psyker, is an Eldar, and a very old and powerful one. Their psychic storm has run well out of control, powerful as they are, but in their weakened state they lack precision. Lord Mkoll, Warlock Eldar, wrought a spell not just of the storm itself, but a conjuration on the minds of the Imperial troops, the Mkoll. In the Tanith First and Only, they believe that they are fighting for their homeworld on the founding fields. For the Volpone, it's Ignix Major, an infamous defeat in the Volpone's battle record. Along with the Volpone, Kulkis is here as well, remembering Dorden's work, saving his life. Bragg is out with an unrealistically heavy weapon, and Mkoll leads them to the structure as if he is walking home from the fields. And all together, they attack the Chaos forces that have surrounded it. The handful of Tanith, Volpone, and the Eldar as well fight together due to the psychic storm, and they fend off the Chaos forces for long enough for the Eldar to close the webway gate that is inside the structure, and that is the important crux of the whole affair. The Eldar cannot let the Chaos gain access to the webway. And ultimately, Inquisitor Lilith assists in closing the webway gate. Later historians study this final fight, and the common conclusion is, well, that it never happened. Given the reported enemy forces and the very limited Imperial numbers in the field, the only answer is that it was an illusion. Gaunt had obviously attacked through open and undefended ground, killing wisps and echoes, illusions of the foe. And with a few paragraphs to wrap things up, the book comes to an end. Hopefully I have curbed my enthusiasm enough throughout this video to not scare you away from a book that obviously I enjoy. And maybe you can see why I recommend this book for the starting point of the series. Picking out each of the characters with a short to focus on them individually gives the reader a great opportunity to get to know how they are portrayed. And they are so well written that they feel real to me. Even after just a few pages, I can imagine how each of them look and sound. I know their jokes and their strengths in combat. What is less consistent is how certain factors fit into the wider 40k lore, which does seem to upset certain people. Certain people. So much of 40k is dealt with in absolutes. No human would ever work with Xenos. No Imperial commander would ever care the slightest about their soldiers. A commissar will absolutely shoot more of his men for minor infractions than the enemy can ever manage, and every planet, all exactly 1 million planets, use exactly the same candle. Gaunt's Ghost as a whole series, but particularly in this book, is far more reasonable, far more realistic. Everything just makes a whole lot more sense in Dan Abnett's prose than it does in the memes of 40k. Lower ranking commanders are often quite competent and care about the soldiers that they know personally. Higher command officers are disconnected enough that complacency sets in, such as Sturm and others. Helping one enemy we can temporarily be amicable with to prevent the victory of an enemy we can never let win, well, that's still a victory for us. The overall plot is coherent enough to be enjoyable, but it doesn't require any pre-knowledge, or keeping track of things as you read. There's no, the entire Imperium depends on this. But the finale does hold some weight, as each of the characters have been introduced and the reader is invested in them personally, rather than being hinged on the scenario. There are a few things that niggle at me as a fan of the series as a whole, such as Bragg getting barely any mention in the finale and Dorden not even being there, even though the two of them both had shorts to introduce them. Getting used to the more involved and frankly epic stories of later novels. Coming back to these shorts, I just want so much more detail. I want each short to be expanded into a 100-page novel, each at least. But that's why it is so good for someone new to the series. Because the main story on Monthax is pretty self-contained. You don't have to continue reading, you don't need to read the third book or the first book to make sense of it. But it just might hook you in and maybe share in the enjoyment that I have taken in this series. Well, if you managed to survive throughout this video, thank you. This took an unnecessarily long time to organise, longer than 3 or 4 of my normal videos to make. It might not have been a good idea to make this video alongside the battle reports. That's sort of just how it started out. This one got put aside until the battle reports are done, that's why there's been a little bit of a gap. If you have any comments, any constructive criticisms, or thanks, please pop them in the comments section below, and please share this with anyone who you think might be remotely interested. And also thanks to Josh for this image. I sent out the request when I started working on this video for images and visual interesting things to go alongside what would be a very long section of me just talking. And Josh has the honour of being the only one to supply an image. And if there is enough enthusiasm for this video, I might consider doing another one. Although it won't be soon, as this takes a long time to make this type of video. I have, of course, been making many other types of video about the Gaunt's ghosts, mainly how to make models with cloaks in 1,000 different ways to give the community all of the information that's needed for anyone who wants to make their own Tanith army. And so I'll leave a playlist in the description so that you can see how my video making has gone from utterly terrible to nearly passable. And hopefully someday I'll get to the point where I'm actually good. Someday. And whilst I do make these videos as a hobby, some people have asked to support me directly, and so there is a donation link for anyone who wants to throw something my way, because I am saving up to get a better camera to record the kind of painting videos. That's what I usually get up to. And so, with my longest video in a few years at a close, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.